Once upon a time, Wizards of the Coast made a lovely product for new players of Magic the Gathering called a starter deck. Now, most card games have some kind of starter deck. Pokemon has 3 different levels of starter deck, depending on what you are trying to play, with League Battle decks being the closest emulation to a competitive deck you can find. Magic the Gathering, on the other hand, seems to have lost the plot on that. Wizards of the Coast apparently thinks that the easiest way to onboard new people into Magic is to have them pick up a modern Commander precon, since there aren't really any starter decks of any variety if you don't count the Arena starter kits, which are only very, very vaguely starter decks. They're more piles of cards that don't really give you the feeling of a real game of Magic the Gathering, how it's going to feel when you play with normal, living, breathing human beings. But I digress. Once upon a time, we actually did receive starter deck product. A couple years ago, Wizards saw fit to release $20 Commander decks that had easier to understand strategies that were less esoteric than something like, oh, make a bunch of clue tokens. Well, if you're a new player, what the hell's a clue token? You don't really know, and it's hard to figure out how you develop that into a winning strategy when you're new. But if you are new, it's very easy to understand, oh, this deck makes zombies. This deck makes a bunch of little creatures. This deck has flying creatures. This deck wants everybody to panic as you make them sacrifice stuff. Carter's a bit esoteric, I'm not gonna lie. This is the closest to a miss they had with them. And this deck makes dragons come out, and the dragons do stuff. These decks were made with 100% reprints, and they were priced originally at $20 each. The goal was these were a very easy onboarding product for people who wanted to get into Magic the Gathering. And I still think if somebody has the money to drop on them, they're still a wonderful starting place. If you've never touched Magic before, and you've got like $100 to spare, which I know is quite a bit, but you've got it around and you need to spend it on something, then, I mean, hell, finding 5 of these decks together for their original price and picking them up isn't really a bad idea, and you're going to get a bunch of good cards you need for other decks in doing so. But that's not what this video is about. This video is about addressing one of the issues with those starter decks, in that you can't really find them anymore. Wizards doesn't make them, and the only way to find them is going to Amazon or TCG Player or Card Kingdom, or you just happen to be lucky and your LGS has one. But they don't seem to be making more. Ideally, the starter decks would be a once-a-year product so that new players could get introduced to new archetypes like artifacts or elves, stuff that is very easy to understand for a newer player and would still give established players some cards that are very, very useful for their collections, like the starter decks are built. Now, the original ethos of these starter decks was to make something that not only was more cost-effective for the player who didn't know if they wanted to get into Magic but still wanted something to start out with, they also wanted to use more mechanically simple cards. And for the most part, they did succeed at having more mechanically simple cards. This did lead to games being slower and it being harder for people to figure out how to get to a easy win con with their deck. But it was still something that happened. They still managed to get these decks out, and they still were a very good starting floor for many new players. So how are we going to address the problem of them not making more of them? Well, by remaking everything that Wizards of the Coast did from the ground up ourselves. The decks will be built with the same price point that Wizards originally sold them at, $20, and we're going to give ourselves a little bit of leg room. So our commander can be $5 or less, but the deck itself, the 99 of the deck, can be up to $20, give or take some change. The other thing is, these decks must be mechanically simple. They can't use any very complex strategies. They can't use anything that a player who is just now learning what the heck a card game is will not be able to understand at a glance. So, in that, we are going to go ahead and start off with today's commander, Ghoul Caller Gissa. I figure for a zombie deck, she is going to be a very mechanically simple creature for people to understand, and she's got a very wonderful win condition baked into her effect. Sacrifice another creature and create a bunch of 2/2 black zombie creatures equal to that creature's power. It should be fairly easy to build a deck around Gissa that is both very mechanically simple and ekes its way towards its win condition using a very easy to understand mechanic. 2/2 zombie tokens. This means that while we're building our deck, we should try to focus every mechanic on making these 2/2 zombie tokens, because when a new player has picked up a deck, it is easiest for them to continue to do the same strategy that they have found works once. If you give them a billion lanes to work with, like say with the Riku of Many Paths decks I recently made, you can't hand that deck to a newer player and expect them to thrive or even enjoy the game. You need to make something that is simple, easy to execute, and the payoff of it is obvious to every single person who is playing it. Imagine trying to explain Magic the Gathering to your grandma. That you need to be looking for cards that do that. So, with a focus on 2/2 zombie tokens being our deck's theme, how are we going to facilitate that? Let's go ahead and start out with what zombies want to do anyway, and that is swarm the board. We're going to go ahead and run with 9 dedicated zombie token producers, and each of these is going to fill a different job for us, but all of them should be very easy to understand for a new player. Malfelled Twins is a card that you typically would not include in most decks, but in this deck, it actually serves a very easy purpose. It does serve a very easy purpose for us. Sorry, language is hard. This is a 4/4 creature that Ghoul Caller Gissa will be able to sacrifice to create 4 zombies, and when the twins die, they will create 2 zombies in their place. This effectively means we're going to spend 6 mana on the twins, and another piece of mana on Ghoul Caller Gissa's effect, so 7 mana total to create 6 2/2 zombies. That math is fairly easy to understand, and it will benefit from one of the supporting strategies we are using, we'll see later in the deck. And then we have Moan of the Unhallowed, a sorcery that will make 2 2/2 black zombie creature tokens, and this will introduce a new player to the flashback mechanic. They'll be able to play this again later at the game for a higher cost with flashback. Ghoulish Procession will teach a new player that there are some triggers that need to be kept up, but it is a trigger that will be very familiar to them already by the time they play it. Anytime a non-token creature dies, make a zombie creature token with Decayed. I tried to avoid using a lot of Decayed zombies because newer players may not feel that they are useful to them, but unfortunately, Ghoulish Procession is just that good at what it does that we needed to include it anyway. Vizier of the Scorpion is one of the few amass cards in this deck because it is giving all of our zombie tokens Death Touch. This will introduce people to a lording mechanic, lording in Anthems or something we'll cover later on in the video. Also, when it enters the battlefield, you get to amass 1. This will give us one other type of zombie token, and luckily Vizier of the Scorpion has all of the reminder text on it, so a new player is not going to have to go rooting through Gatherer to figure out what amass does. Speaking of amass, we'll have Dreadhorde Invasion in here, because even though it has a small ability of letting you amass 1 on your turn, the biggest thing is that it will make all the zombie tokens have lifelink. This should make a new player more willing to throw their zombies at their opponents. Basically, just explain it to them like, hey, you're trying to have Legions of the Undead ram somebody down like they're a Walking Dead extra. As long as they understand, oh, there are benefits to me attacking even when my zombies die, they'll be more likely to engage in combat. Army of the Damned is a wonderful top-end spell that will be really exciting for a new player. Create 13 2/2 black zombie creature tokens, and again, we're going to reinforce that flashback mechanic for those players. Open the Graves is another version of Ghoulish Procession with a higher mana cost. Anytime one of our non-token creatures die, we will make a vanilla 2/2 black zombie creature token. More cards that give us the thing that our commander is trying to do will be very, very easy for new players to grasp. Then we have a Grave Titan. Nitpicking nerds be damned. Grave Titan enters the battlefield, introducing a new player to the enter the battlefield effect, and it will create 2 zombie creature tokens when it does, and facilitating that earlier let people try to do combat more often ethos we're going to try to work with. The Grave Titan also spawns more zombie tokens every time it attacks. This will hopefully help de-incentivize a newer player from just sitting in the back and building a board state and not doing anything, so that they're actively trying to work out how do they close out a game, because their in-game actions will work them towards closing out a game. Finally, each of these decks is going to have at least one Planeswalker, because I do think that that is a mechanic that players need to get used to, and for this one, we've chosen Liliana Death's Majesty. She makes 2/2 zombie creature tokens, exactly like our deck wants to do, and she has a reanimation effect on her and a board wipe if the zombie player can keep this creature alive for long enough. This should be a good payoff to incentivize the person to figure out how they can make this creature or this Planeswalker work better for them. But the most important part of Liliana, honestly, is that her +1 ability, which is the thing we want people to be doing the most of, does the thing the deck wants to do, and only that, and simply that. It makes a 2/2 zombie. Next, we need to find ways to reinforce the central strategy, not just execute it over and over again. This is a way to make sure that strategies will be more interesting for newer players. So, we're going to begin with our Lords and Anthem package, beginning with Liliana's Devotee. Gives all of our zombies 1/0, and if any creatures have died at our end step, we get to make a zombie creature token, replacing tokens we might have lost, and this will be one of the first subtle reinforcements to a newer player. Hey, you need to keep an eye out for end step triggers. We don't want to put too many of these in a deck because that can overwhelm a newer player, but we do want to very subtly point out, hey, some of these cards do exist. Death Priest of Merkel has an end of step trigger we're basically going to ignore. The important part for this is that it gives all skeletons, zombies, and vampires, so in our case just zombies, 1/1. Liliana's Majesty will give us some tokens to play around with, while also giving all zombies +1/+1 as well. This added oomph to the power and toughness of all of your zombies will help facilitate engaging in more combat for a newer player. Lord of the Accursed will give all zombies 1/1 and will give them Menace, and thankfully it has the reminder text on it so that the newer player will understand, oh, this makes my zombies harder to block. I should swing with them more. Death Baron will give all of our zombies 1/1 and Death Touch, making them harder to block for anybody who doesn't want to lose their creatures. Risen Executioner will give all of our zombies 1/1, and you can cast it from the graveyard as well, which will start to introduce the idea that, hey, zombies aren't just about sacrificing themselves, they also want to bring themselves back from the graveyard. I know, common knowledge, but still. Cemetery Reaper will give our deck its token ability to exile stuff from somebody else's graveyard and make 2/2 zombie creature tokens as a benefit for doing so. Also, gives all zombie creatures 1/1. Graph Harvest will give all of our zombies Menace as well, and we can exile the creature from our own graveyard to put a zombie creature token on the battlefield. This will at least show some players that, hey, you don't want to lose everything from your grave, but every now and again, there are some cards that are just spent enough that you can use them again. Then we have Tomb Tyrant at the top end of here, giving all zombies 1/1 and with a tap ability that lets us sack a creature and return any zombie creature at random from our graveyard to the battlefield. We can only do this if there are 3 zombies in the graveyard, which will cause the player to start counting their graveyard and thinking of it less like a discard pile in a traditional card game and more like what it is in Magic the Gathering. Hand number 2. Newer players also are going to want to see the cards in their deck more often so that they are presented with more instances of being able to utilize them. If a player is sitting there just top decking the entire time, they're not going to have a good time. So like with any deck, we are going to have a big draw package, but we need to focus on simple draw cards, not complicated engines instead. So we are going to focus on having things like Altar's Reap, Nasty End. These cards just sacrifice creatures and give us draw power. That's a perfectly reasonable thing for us to be doing in a zombie deck. Reckoner's Bargain is doing the same thing. We'll add in a single Mazzolanti the Great Door, as it lets us discard cards to draw cards. We have a higher than normal land count in this deck, so this will hopefully help people get through some dead draws. And the transform mechanic is important if the player cares about it, but they can ignore it if they so choose. We'll also add in some very, very simple draw, like Ambition's Cost, which makes us lose 3 life to draw 3 cards, Ancient Craving, which is the same thing, Read the Bones, which will introduce the player to Scry, also letting us draw 2 off of that Scry, and Assign in Blood, which is a simple draw 2 spell. Finally, Village Rites will be the lowest costed way to sacrifice a creature and draw 2 cards. Undead Augur will give us draw power for every time a zombie dies. This will help supplement and reinforce the main ability of our commander. And then we have Archghoul of Thraben. Anytime it or another zombie dies, we can look at the top card of our library. If it is in fact a zombie, then we can put that card into our hand. Otherwise, we may put it in the graveyard. Our deck does contain 16 individual zombie creatures because we are focused very heavily on the zombie token strategy, so this will also help facilitate a player going, oh, if I want to lean into a different zombie strategy that is more of a Wilhelt style strategy, where you have a bunch of zombies that sacrifice for benefit, this will be a bridge into that other strategy if they choose to have it. Otherwise, it's a 3/2 that they get to play that sometimes will give them benefits. Probably goes without saying that when we are using more budget-friendly cards, like we are using for this deck, we will need a strong ramp package, but the ramp package that we use for this deck is going to have to be a little different than my normal ramp packages. We do want to make sure that in most of these decks a Soul Ring is included, and we also want to make sure that people have access to some very simple ramp spells that will help curve out their deck better. So, beginning with Unstable Obelisk, this is a ramp spell that will also give any new player an option for removing something later in the game if they feel like they're getting overwhelmed. Charcoal Diamond, basic ramp. Mind Stone is basic ramp, giving us access to more mana. Also, we can sacrifice it to draw a card. Same with Command Sphere. Speaking of drawing cards, in most of these decks, I'm going to be including a copy of Thought Vessel so that newer players will go, oh, there are ways that I can break some of the rules of the game, like the maximum hand size rule. Solemn Simulacrum gives us access to sacrifice benefits in its draw ability. It also gives us a basic land when we play it. Planar Atlas will make it to where a newer player can start getting used to the top of deck mechanics. It's a basic mana rock otherwise, but it can also smooth out early game lands for people. Soul Ring gives us access to 2 mana, obviously. Wayfarer's Bauble gives us access to a basic land from the deck. And Heraldic Banner is going to be included in most of the mono-color decks that we build, because this will not only give people mana of the chosen color they need, you know, in this case, black, it's all black zombies, but also it's another Lord, which will directly benefit what the deck is trying to do. Like with the previously mentioned items, I even want to make sure that the removal and interaction section is very, very simple. I don't want there to be some recurrable, ridiculously powerful engines that a player is going to have access to, because the goal is to get their feet wet. So we're going to begin with some very, very simple cards in this 10-card removal package. Murder. Very, very simple, just destroys a creature. Easy for a new player to understand. Reckless Spite can destroy 2 non-black creatures at the cost of 5 life. Cruel Revival will give us a zombie from our graveyard to our hand while also blowing up a non-zombie creature. Meteor Golem will give anybody who is new to the game access to Omni Removal. Doomblade destroys any non-black creature. Overseer of the Damned reinforces the token strategy of the deck while also letting us destroy creatures whenever it comes onto the battlefield. Fleshbag Marauder is a zombie and the sole way that our deck is going to be able to get around pesky effects like Indestructible for newer players. Siphon Flesh, another Fleshbag Marauder, but it does give us a zombie creature token for every creature that is sacrificed with the Siphon Flesh ability. Feed the Swarm is in here as usual in any black deck because it does blow up enchantments. And then we have Deadly Plot, which can either destroy a creature or a planeswalker or reanimate any zombie card from our graveyard to the battlefield. This will be one of the few times we have a modal card in the deck. I do think that people need to learn how to use modal cards, but this one specifically just happens to fill the slot oh so perfectly. Of course, since we are a zombie deck, it's obvious recursion and reanimation is going to be another theme we want to dip our toes into, so we have a very simple one, Grave Digger and Ghoul Razor. Both of these will take one of our zombies and put it back into our hand from the graveyard. Grave Spawn Sovereign will give us double use of the zombie tokens we have, because this lets us tap 5 untapped zombies and put a creature from our graveyard onto the battlefield. Ideally, we use this to just recur Grave Titan a lot. Victimize will sacrifice one of our zombies to revive 2 creatures from our grave. Zombie Apocalypse will revive all zombies at once, another card that will help reinforce the want to lean into more zombie cards if they choose to change the deck around as well. Vat of Rebirth will benefit us as we are sacrificing zombies to Ghoulcaller Gissa with recurable access to reanimation. This is one of the more complicated cards we're choosing to put into the deck, but it's such an easy card to play, and if a player forgets that it has triggers on it, it's not the end of the world, so long as eventually they get it. Probably one of the more complicated things in the deck, though, is we do have the other version of Gissa, the one from Midnight Hunt, Glorious Resurrector. If any creature and opponent would die, we get to exile it instead, small stacks effect, and at the beginning of our upkeep, we can put all of our opponent's creatures exiled this way under our control, and they do gain decay. This is a good secondary commander option for the newer player if they choose to go with a different Gissa, but the deck is primarily tuned for the main Gissa. Then we have Scourge of Nel-Toth. You may cast it from your graveyard by paying 2 black mana and sacrificing 2 of our zombies rather than playing its cost. This zombie dragon is a very, very fun top end for a newer player to have access to. It lets them feel like they have a piece of power they don't really have to be super careful with, and they can keep throwing it at their opponent. It also introduces them to the flying mechanic, which is, you know, more than a little important. But we do need to have some alternate win cons for newer players as well. They will sometimes find situations where they cannot just beat their way through an opponent's cards. So Vengeful Dead and Siege Zombie are in here. Siege Zombie lets us tap our zombies to make each opponent lose 1 life, and Vengeful Dead will burn each opponent for 1 every time it or another zombie dies. These will give new players access to a couple of alternate ways to win the game, but not so much that they're leaning super hard into a full-on aristocrat strategy. Finally, when it comes to lands, we want to be very, very simple. We want to start out with the idea that lands are a resource, and having to keep track of a billion different utility lands is not really a good thing to do for a new player. So, to facilitate that, we only have a single utility land in the deck, and that is a Myriad Landscape, because it does help a new player ramp into more lands. Otherwise, we have 37 swamps in the deck, which can be considered a bit overkill, but I think for these starter decks, we need to lean heavier on the mana so that a newer player is always having access to their cards. Nothing feels worse in Magic the Gathering than not being able to play your cards. So we are always going to lean heavier on the mana, because when you have land, you at least can play your cards. Finally, we do want a player to have access to a few board wipes, but we want to be careful about the board wipes we put in the deck. Any board wipe that is added to a starter deck should have some type of benefit to that player so that they feel incentivized to use that board wipe even when they are in a situation where they've got a board they want to keep. A new player may not have the skills yet to analyze a board state with 3 other players staring down the board at them, so we need to put a little bit of extra text on our board wipes to make sure that they are incentivized to cast them, even if things look like they might be able to eke out ahead when they really can't. So to facilitate that, one of our board wipes is Decree of Pain. No matter how far ahead the zombie player is, this card will allow them to draw a card every time a zombie, or for every zombie that dies. This should help them go, oh, I may have 20 zombie tokens on the board, but after swinging with them, I need to eliminate that person's dragons over there. This card can do so, and then I'll draw a bunch of cards, and it'll feel great. They won't feel bad about losing their cards. Necromantic Selection can also help out a ton, because if there's one thing that a new commander player hates doing, it's losing their commander. They haven't quite understood that losing your commander isn't the worst thing in the world. It can just be replayed again, unlike other cards in their deck. So, to try to ease them out of that, Necromantic Selection should be able to just bring their commander back after it blows up a board. It also can help that it can steal stuff from other people, and it can steal commanders from other players as well. Not a lesson they need to be learning immediately, but certainly something that'll be fun for them to figure out later on down the road. All in all, I hope that the deck will end up being simple enough for a newer player to grasp, but still be mechanically dense enough for them to want to play around with as time goes on, instead of just thinking that Magic is too simple and therefore not fun for them. I can imagine a Yu-Gi-Oh player coming over to Magic running into that problem. But I think with our commander selection of Ghoulcaller Gissa being one that can constantly ramp up, and it has a secret hidden ability that people might not realize, a very, very simple one though, that'll happen inadvertently throughout a game, it makes Anthem cards infinitely stronger. So whenever you sacrifice a zombie that is under the effects of the +1/+1 or +1/+0, any of those effects, then you're generating more zombies as a result of that, and the zombies you're creating are getting exponentially more benefit from those Anthem effects. If you sacrifice a 2/2 zombie, you make 2 zombies. But if you have 2 Anthem effects, it's a 4/4 zombie. So you sacrifice one 4/4 zombie now, any zombie, it can be one of the tokens Ghoulcaller Gissa makes, and suddenly you have 4 4/4 zombies. Instead of turning 2 damage into 4 damage, we get to turn 4 damage into 16 damage. And I hope you can see how ridiculous that can get the more Anthems we have stacked up on the board. Imagine having just a few cards out there. You're a new player and you've managed to get your Heraldic Banner on the board. You've named black. Feels pretty good, feels okay. And then you manage to cast just a couple of cards. You've got Death Baron, Risen Executioner. Maybe you've got Cemetery Reaper on the board as well. So we've got a 6/6 lording out onto our 2/2 zombies. Just imagine that new player's face lighting up when they realize, hold on, I can sacrifice this Scourge of Neltoth. It's a 10/10 right now. I can pay 2 mana and get it right back by sacking 2 of the zombies that I make from Gissa, and I get to generate, effectively, net 8 zombies that are all 5/5s. That's 40 damage on the board. The minute that new player is faced with that idea of, oh, I can make my zombies legion, and I can do it in just a very, very easy way. They can incrementally get to it, which is how the commander is designed, or they can slowly figure out how to create that gigantic board state. A newer player's face lighting up as they realize, oh, the potential is basically limitless with this, is kind of nutty. And then there are some other interesting angles you can go into, like giving people access to some Go Tall cards that can grant a lot of power to a zombie before sacking it. Who knows? They can figure out where they want to take the deck once they have it in their hands. But I figure this is a commander that starts out looking very simple, and then there are layers that a new player will find to, realize that there's a bunch of different things they can do with it if they just manipulate what they are sacrificing and making sure that they're getting max value out of it. Or just sacrificing the same zombie token that Gissa makes every single time. Even in a 0 power game state, Ghoulcaller Gissa can sack a 2/2 zombie token to make 2 zombies, which can eventually lead to more zombies throughout a game. That alone is enough incentive to just start playing with her mechanic for a newer player. But let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. Hopefully I made something that is interesting enough for a newer player, but still has enough oomph for an established player. That's kind of what the starter decks were designed for to be for Wizards of the Coast. And if you have any suggestions of commanders that fit this particular criteria, let me know in the comment section below. Remember, we are trying to go with simple and straightforward, but effective and powerful for anything we're doing. Not just the commander, but also in the 99. Let me know what you think of this type of video in the comment section below. I know that this is a new type of thing for me to try, but I've kind of wanted to try my hand at some starter decks, and this idea has been floating in my head for weeks, so here we are. Let me know what you think. Hit the like button, all that other fun stuff that YouTube likes, and insert end of video tagline here. Hey, I just quickly want to give a thank you to all of my wonderful patrons who keep this show running. YouTube and Twitch are a pretty bumpy ride at the best of times, and the stability that Patreon provides me is worth more than I can say here. I'd also like to thank each and every one of my $20 and up patrons here, and they would be Red Joker, Britzkrieg, Cameron, Dren, Jemshin, Smiling DM, Poundini, Mabbity Babbity, Naomi, Isaac, Agamotto, Jordan, Ravi, Giuni, Kiratorian, Prisma, all of you, I'm not saying that part, and Starlight. And finally, thank you to everyone else that helps keep this channel alive. While you're here, why not check out another video? And thank you for watching.